What if everything people admire about you, your strength, your calm under pressure, even your sense of purpose, wasn't built in the moments they see, but in the ones they don't? Imagine the real work of becoming who you are happens not on stage, not in the spotlight, but in the quiet, unseen choices you make when no one's watching. That's the heart of Stoic philosophy, and it's what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The most powerful version of yourself isn't crafted in the applause or the visible victories. It's forged in the invisible battles, the mornings you choose discipline over comfort, the nights you choose reflection over distraction, the moments you choose integrity even when it costs you. This is the essence of Stoicism, the understanding that true character isn't performative. It's not about what you show the world, but what you demand of yourself when the world isn't looking. Think about the last time you faced a challenge. Did you rise to it because someone was watching, or because you've spent countless private hours building the resilience to do so? The Stoics knew that self-mastery isn't a single dramatic act. It's the accumulation of tiny, deliberate choices, the decision to pause instead of react, to reflect instead of resent, to act with intention instead of impulse. These are the moments that shape you far more than any public achievement ever could. In this video, we're going to explore how Stoic principles like resilience, intentionality, and self-discipline don't just prepare you for life's big tests, they quietly construct the person you become. Because the strongest identity isn't built in the visible struggles, it's woven into the fabric of your daily, unseen decisions. And when you start to recognize the power of those invisible choices, something shifts. You realize that every small act of courage, every quiet moment of discipline, is another thread in the tapestry of who you are. So let's begin, not with the grand gestures, but with the hidden, humble work that truly defines you. Seneca once wrote that fame is nothing but the applause of people who would quickly turn to booing you the moment you stepped out of line. And he wasn't just being cynical, he was pointing to a deeper truth about where we place our sense of worth. Stoicism challenges us to ask, what happens when you build your identity on something as fleeting as other people's opinions? The answer is simple. You become as unstable as the approval you chase. Think about social media for a moment. Every like, every comment, every share gives a tiny hit of validation. But what happens when the algorithm changes or the crowd moves on? You're left scrambling to reinvent yourself, to perform for an audience that never really knew you in the first place. Now contrast that with the Stoic practice of journaling. No audience, no applause, just you and the blank page, confronting your own thoughts without filters. When Marcus Aurelius wrote his private meditations, he wasn't crafting them for praise. He was refining his character in the quiet, where no one could see. That's the difference between external validation and inner growth. One depends on the unpredictable reactions of others. The other is built on the steady foundation of self-awareness. So here's a question to sit with. When was the last time you made a choice truly, deeply, just for you? Not because it would look good, not because someone might approve, but because it aligned with the person you're trying to become. That's where Stoicism draws the line. Your worth isn't measured by the noise of the crowd, but by the integrity of your private moments. The philosopher Epictetus, born a slave, put it bluntly: if anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, don't make excuses. Just reply, he must not know my other faults, or he would have mentioned those instead. That's the power of detachment, the freedom of not needing anyone else's opinion to define you. This isn't about rejecting connection or becoming indifferent to the world. It's about recognizing that the strongest sense of self comes from within. When you stop outsourcing your identity to the opinions of others, something remarkable happens. You stop living in reaction to trends, to expectations, to the fear of disapproval. Instead, you start acting from a place of quiet conviction, because the truth is, no amount of external validation can give you what a single, honest moment of self-reflection can. Consider how you start your day, those first groggy moments when the alarm goes off. Do you reach for your phone, immediately flooding your mind with notifications and other people's agendas? Or do you take those quiet minutes to set the tone for the hours ahead? Epictetus, the Stoic teacher who turned hardship into wisdom, put it plainly: first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. That's the power of morning rituals. They're not just routines, they're declarations. Every time you choose stillness over distraction, reflection over reaction, you're not just preparing for the day. You're reinforcing who you are. Picture two versions of your morning. One is frantic, snoozing until the last minute, rushing through tasks, letting outside demands dictate your energy before you've even had a chance to think. The other begins with intention. Maybe it's 5 minutes of journaling like Marcus Aurelius did, asking yourself, what's one thing I can control today? Maybe it's a short walk, using the rhythm of your steps to ground yourself before the world interrupts. The difference isn't just in time management, it's in the quiet cultivation of discipline. Those unseen minutes add up. They're the repetitions in the gym of your character, each one strengthening your ability to act, not react. Here's a simple Stoic practice to try. Before you check your phone, before you let the day's noise in, pause. Take 3 deep breaths. Remind yourself that today will bring challenges, some within your control, most not, and that your power lies in how you meet them. This isn't about perfection, it's about presence. The Stoics didn't demand flawless mornings, they prioritized purposeful ones. Even on days when chaos comes early, the ritual of pausing, even for a moment, anchors you. So ask yourself, what does your first hour after waking teach you about resilience? Is it training you to default to distraction, or to move with intention? Because the way you start your day doesn't just shape your schedule, it shapes your mindset, your patience, your ability to face adversity without crumbling. And those invisible choices, the ones no one applauds, are the ones that fortify you when life demands strength you didn't know you had. There's a profound difference between suffering and enduring, between letting hardship define you and letting it refine you. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who ruled Rome through wars and plagues, wrote in his private journals, "The art of living is more like wrestling than dancing, because it requires you to stand firm against sudden and unexpected attacks." Notice he didn't say avoid the attacks. He didn't say complain about them or demand sympathy. He said stand firm. That's the Stoic distinction. Pain is inevitable, but victimhood is optional. Take the story of Kotto the Younger, a Roman senator who embodied this principle. When his political rivals stripped him of power, humiliated him publicly, and forced him out of Rome, he didn't rally supporters or beg for pity. He walked into exile with the same dignity he'd carried in victory. Years later, when defeat was certain and his enemies surrounded him, he chose to end his life rather than compromise his principles, not as an act of despair, but as a final, silent assertion of control over his own character. Before the sword fell, he spent his last hours reading Plato's Phaedo, a dialogue on the immortality of the soul. No theatrics, no audience, just a man meeting his fate with unshaken clarity. This is what the Stoics meant by apatheia, not apathy, but a refusal to let external chaos dictate internal peace. When you endure silently, you're not pretending the pain isn't real. You're choosing not to let it distort your judgment or your values. Think of a time you pushed through a difficulty without fanfare. may be an injury you trained through, a betrayal you forgave without spectacle, or a dream you pursued despite skepticism. Those quiet battles aren't just tests of stamina, they're laboratories of character. Every uncomplaining step teaches you something new about your capacity to persevere. So here's a challenge. Next time you face adversity, ask not, "How can I make this easier?" but, "What can this reveal about me?" The Stoics believed hardship was a mirror, showing us who we truly are when the world isn't watching. And in that reflection, you might discover a resilience you never knew you had forged, not in the spotlight, but in the silence. Integrity isn't what you do when people are watching, it's what you do when they've turned away. Epictetus put it bluntly, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." That's the heart of unspoken integrity. Actions so aligned with your values that no applause is needed to keep them true. Think about the last time you saw someone post a grand gesture online, a donation, a protest, a virtue signal, and then contrast that with the colleague who stays late to fix a mistake no one will ever notice, or the friend who tells you the hard truth when no one else is around to hear it. One performance seeks validation, the other is integrity in its purest form, quiet, consistent, and unconcerned with credit. Take a modern workplace dilemma. Imagine you're handed a project with a tight deadline, and you discover a shortcut that would save hours but compromise quality. No one would know if you cut corners. The client might never notice. Your boss might even praise the quick turnaround, but you'd know. That's the moment integrity speaks loudest, not in the oath you swear publicly, but in the choice you make privately. The Stoics called this prohersis, the power of deliberate moral choice. It's not about being perfect, it's about being accountable to your own standards, even when it costs you. Now reflect on your own life. When was the last time you did the right thing without a witness? Maybe it was returning the extra change a cashier accidentally gave you, or admitting fault in an argument when you could have easily shifted blame. Those uncelebrated moments are where character is forged. The philosopher Seneca warned that a man who is good only when it suits him is not good at all. Integrity isn't a costume you wear for an audience, it's the skin you live in every day. So here's the challenge. Tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself, where did my actions today truly align with my values? Not because someone was watching, but because it was right. That's the power of unspoken integrity. It's not flashy, it won't trend, but it's the quiet foundation of every strong identity, the kind that doesn't waver when the spotlight fades. Seneca once observed that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, not because life is painless, but because we mistake our reactions for the events themselves. Picture this: you're stuck in traffic, late for an important meeting. Your hands grip the wheel, your pulse races, and with every honk, your frustration grows. Now ask yourself, is the traffic causing your anger, or is it your belief that the world should move at your pace? That's the Stoic pivot point, the realization that while you can't control the jam, you control what you do with the time, the meaning you assign to the delay, even the way you let it shape your mood. Here's the uncomfortable truth Stoicism confronts. Calling yourself a victim of circumstances is often just a way to avoid the harder work of self-mastery. When Seneca wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from fiction than from reality," he wasn't dismissing genuine hardship. He was exposing how quickly we surrender our agency by blaming externals, the weather, the economy, other people's actions for our inner turmoil. Take a mundane example. Someone cut you off in line at the grocery store. You could fume, mutter under your breath, even confront them, or you could recognize that their rudeness says nothing about you, while your response says everything. The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control, not as a platitude, but as a practical tool. Every irritation is an invitation to ask, What part of this is truly mine to govern? Now reflect on your own life. When did you last face a setback, a cancelled flight, a rejected proposal, a misunderstood comment, and default to blaming instead of reframing? The shift isn't about pretending things don't sting. It's about reclaiming the power to decide what they mean. Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal, illness, and war, yet his journals reveal a man who asked not, "Why is this happening to me?" But what can I do with this? So here's the challenge. Next time life interrupts your plans, pause. Before the complaint leaves your lips, ask, am I suffering because of the event or because of the story I'm telling myself about it? That's the difference between victimhood and ownership. One leaves you at the mercy of the world. The other reminds you that your perspective is the one thing no traffic jam, no rude stranger, no failed plan can ever take from you. There's a profound misunderstanding about Stoic indifference, as if it meant shutting off your emotions or not caring at all. But that's not what apatheia is. Picture standing by a river, watching leaves float past. You see them clearly, but you don't jump in to chase them. That's the Stoic approach to emotions, observing without being swept away. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." He wasn't telling himself to stop feeling. He was reminding himself to choose which feelings deserved his energy. Think of a musician rehearsing for a concert. She practices for hours, refining every note, not because she's attached to standing ovations, but because excellence is its own reward. The night of the performance, if the crowd is thin or the sound system fails, she still plays with the same integrity. That's detachment in action, pouring yourself into what you control, then releasing your grip on the outcome. The Stoics called this amor fati, loving fate, not as passive resignation, but as active acceptance of life's unpredictability. Now consider your own life. Where are you clinging too tightly to results? Maybe it's a promotion you're convinced will validate your worth, or a relationship you're desperate to fix on your terms. Detachment isn't about giving up. It's about recognizing that your peace can't depend on things outside your hands. Epictetus, who endured slavery before becoming a philosopher, put it starkly: freedom isn't secured by filling your pockets, but by emptying your desires. Here's a practice to try. Pick one thing you're overly attached to, a goal, a person's opinion, even a daily expectation. For a week, consciously separate your effort from the outcome. Work diligently, then whisper to yourself, what happens after isn't mine to command. Notice how it shifts your anxiety. That's the art of mental detachment, not caring less but caring wisely. Because when you stop conflating your worth with external results, you discover a quiet strength, one that no disappointment can erode. Every parent knows the moment your child spills their drink for the third time during dinner, and you feel that surge of frustration rising. You could snap, lecture, or punish, or you could take a breath and ask yourself, is this worth the energy I'm about to spend? That's Stoic discernment in action, the art of separating what demands your attention from what only seems to. Epictetus drew a line between what's within our control and what isn't, but he didn't stop there. He taught that wisdom isn't just knowing the difference, it's having the discipline to act on it. Imagine two leaders facing a crisis. One reacts immediately, firing off emails, calling emergency meetings, scrambling to look decisive. The other pauses, assessing what can actually be influenced, what must be accepted, and where to focus effort for real impact. The first is driven by the illusion of control. The second operates with Stoic intentionality. The difference isn't in their skills or intelligence. It's in their ability to discern between battles and distractions. Think about the last argument you had, maybe with a coworker over a missed deadline or a partner over an offhand comment. How much of your reaction was about the actual issue, and how much was just pride, habit, or the need to be right. The Stoics called this prosoph mindful attention to your impulses before they harden into actions. It's the practice of asking, will this matter in a week? A year before investing your emotional currency. Here's the challenge. Reflect on a recent conflict where you poured energy into something that, in hindsight, changed nothing. Now contrast it with a time you chose not to engage when you let a rude remark pass or overlooked a minor mistake, which left you stronger. That's the power of choosing battles wisely. It's not avoidance, it's the recognition that every ounce of energy spent on the uncontrollable is stolen from what truly shapes your life. The next time you feel provoked, hear Epictetus' question, is this something that's up to me? Your peace depends on the answer. The most uncomfortable truths about ourselves rarely surface in daylight. They hide in the shadows of our awareness, waiting for the quiet moments when we're too exhausted to look away. Seneca knew this when he wrote, "When the lamp has been taken away and my wife has fallen silent, I examine my entire day and measure what I've done and said." That nightly ritual wasn't just reflection, it was confrontation. The Stoics didn't journal to pat themselves on the back. They wrote to meet the versions of themselves they'd rather ignore. The petty thoughts, the unspoken resentments, the moments where fear masqueraded as reason. Picture this, you're reviewing your day, and there it is, that tense conversation where you bristled at feedback. On the surface, you told yourself it was about professionalism. But in the quiet, you recognize the truth. It stung because part of you still ties your worth to being right. That's shadow work, not the grand declarations of self-improvement we post online, but the humbling act of sitting with the parts of yourself that don't fit the story you tell about who you are. Here's a confession from someone who practiced this. For years, they prided themselves on being decisive. Then one night, journaling about a missed opportunity, they saw the pattern. Their decisiveness was often just impatience dressed up as confidence. The realization didn't come with fanfare. It arrived like a whisper. You rush because you're afraid of being seen as uncertain. That's the power of Stoic self-examination. It doesn't flatter, it reveals. So tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself the harder question. What truth about yourself have you been circling but refusing to name? Maybe it's the envy you dismiss as ambition, or the avoidance you call being easygoing. The Stoics believed true strength began with this, not conquering external obstacles, but facing the internal ones you've trained yourself not to see. Because the flaws we acknowledge lose their power to steer us blindly, and the person you become isn't shaped by the truths you proclaim, but by the ones you finally admit. There's a peculiar kind of courage that only reveals itself when the crowd is moving in the opposite direction, when the cost of holding your ground isn't just discomfort, but isolation. Kotto the Younger, the Stoic senator who refused to bend to Julius Caesar's rising tyranny, didn't just disagree with the dictatorship. He lived his dissent in every unyielding step, even as his allies defected one by one. On the day the Senate voted to grant Caesar unprecedented power, Kotto was the lone voice shouting objections until he was dragged from the chamber. Later, when a friend urged him to flee Rome to safety, he replied, "I would rather die standing than live on my knees." That's the difference between stubbornness and principle. One clings to opinion, the other to integrity, even when the world labels it impractical or extreme. Now fast forward to modern life. Imagine walking into a grocery store and deliberately choosing the ethically sourced product, not because it's trendy or someone's watching, but because you've weighed the cost and decided it aligns with your values, even if it's pricier or less convenient. That's today's quiet defiance. No one applauds you at the checkout line. No one knows you've sacrificed for a belief no one demanded you hold. But that's precisely where conviction is tested, not in the grand gestures that earn social credit, but in the mundane choices that only your conscience witnesses. Here's the uncomfortable question Stoicism forces us to confront. When was the last time you stood by an unpopular belief without the safety net of validation? Maybe it was staying silent during a heated debate because you refused to exaggerate for effect. Maybe it was returning the extra money when the billing error was in your favor. These moments don't make headlines, they don't earn applause, but they're the invisible threads weaving the fabric of your character. The philosopher Zeno, founder of Stoicism, warned that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so we can listen twice as much as we speak. Sometimes the bravest act isn't declaring your stance, it's living it so consistently that no announcement is needed. So reflect on this. What belief have you defended lately, not with words but with action? Not when it was easy, but when it exacted a price, because the measure of your convictions isn't how loudly you proclaim them in friendly company, it's how quietly you uphold them when the room empties. That's the courage Kotto understood, not the kind that seeks glory, but the kind that endures unseen, because anything less would betray the person you've chosen to become. Imagine stepping into a cold shower first thing in the morning, not by accident but by choice. That initial shock, the way your breath catches, the instinct to retreat. Now imagine staying. That's ascesis, the Stoic practice of voluntary discomfort. It's not about punishing yourself or proving toughness. It's about rewiring your relationship with ease, about remembering that you can endure more than your instincts tell you. The Stoics didn't glorify suffering, they trained for it like athletes preparing for a race, because life doesn't ask permission before it turns cold. Take fasting as another example. Skipping a meal isn't just about hunger, it's about noticing how quickly your mind equates comfort with necessity. The gnawing in your stomach, the distraction, the irrational irritation when your usual routine is disrupted. These are mirrors. They show you how much of your peace depends on conditions you can't always control. Seneca would deliberately wear thin clothes in winter or sleep on a hard floor. Not because he lacked resources, he was one of Rome's wealthiest men, but because he understood comfort as a subtle tyrant. The more you rely on it, the more it demands. Now contrast that with modern life's obsession with convenience. We outsource discomfort at every turn: meal kits to avoid grocery lines, apps to skip traffic, endless scrolling to avoid boredom. The irony, the safer we make our bodies, the more fragile our minds become. One delayed package or slow Wi-Fi connection can unravel an entire day. The Stoics would have recognized this as a dangerous trade, momentary ease for long-term resilience. Here's the challenge: pick one comfort this week, just one, and temporarily let it go. It could be something as small as leaving your phone outside the bathroom, or as tangible as taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Notice what arises: the impatience, the rationalizations. This is stupid. The itch to revert. That's the point. You're not just denying yourself a convenience, you're exposing the invisible grip it has on you. Because resilience isn't built in the abstract, it's forged in these tiny, deliberate acts of resistance. And when you do this, something unexpected happens. The cold shower stops being torture and becomes a lesson. The hunger pang stops being an emergency and becomes data. You start to recognize a quiet truth: discomfort isn't the enemy. Dependency is, because the person who can choose hardship is the person who can't be forced into it. That's the real power of ascesis, not in the suffering, but in the freedom it reveals. The freedom of knowing you're never truly trapped by circumstance, only by your unwillingness to meet it. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who carried the weight of Rome on his shoulders, wrote to himself in his private journals, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself, but not cruel." That last part changes everything. Stoicism isn't about merciless self-scrutiny. It's about replacing the inner tyrant with an inner teacher. Think of the difference between a coach who berates you for missing a shot and one who shows you how to adjust your stance. Both hold you accountable, but one builds while the other breaks. Consider the creative who endlessly revises their work, convinced it's never good enough. The drafts pile up, the deadlines pass, and all that's left is exhaustion. That's not discipline, it's fear masquerading as rigor. The Stoics knew that true growth requires honest reflection, not self-flagellation. When Epictetus taught his students, he didn't shame them for mistakes. He asked, "What did this reveal?" That subtle shift from "you failed" to "what can we learn?" turns criticism into fuel. Now picture your own mental dialogue. When you fall short of a goal, does your inner voice sound like a drill sergeant or a wise mentor? The former might say, "You're lazy, you'll never finish this." The latter would observe, "Today was harder than expected. What support do you need to try again tomorrow?" Both acknowledge the setback, but one leaves room for growth while the other digs a pit of resignation. Here's the challenge. Identify one harsh judgment you repeat to yourself. Maybe it's, "I should have known better," or "they're all ahead of me." Now rewrite it as if you were speaking to a friend you deeply respect. That's Stoic self-compassion, holding yourself to high standards without denying your humanity. Because the strongest identities aren't forged in self-contempt, but in the quiet balance of accountability and grace. Marcus knew this when he reminded himself, "You're just a soul carrying a corpse." Even an emperor could laugh at his own imperfections. So ask yourself today, where can you soften the edge of your self-talk? Not to excuse inaction, but to create space for the resilience that only kindness to yourself can build. Every great river begins with a single drop of rain, a truth Seneca understood when he wrote, "Life is long if you know how to use it." He wasn't talking about adding years to your life, but depth to your days. Because the person you become isn't determined by a handful of dramatic moments. It's carved by the 1,000 tiny choices you make when no one's keeping score. That's the paradox of time. We overestimate what we can do in a day and underestimate what we can build in a decade. Take two people starting at the same point. One spends 30 minutes each morning scrolling through social media, numbing their mind with fragments of other people's lives. The other uses those same minutes to read just 10 pages a day. At that pace, they finish a book every month, 12 a year. In 5 years, that's 60 books. Not just knowledge gained, but a mind reshaped, a perspective widened by the slow accumulation of wisdom. Meanwhile, the first person has nothing to show but a thumb calloused from swiping. The difference isn't talent or luck. It's the weight of small choices compounding in silence. Procrastination thrives on the illusion that time is limitless. We tell ourselves, "I'll start tomorrow," as if tomorrow isn't already being swallowed by today's inertia. The Stoics saw this clearly. Seneca warned that we squander time as if it came from a bottomless well, only to gasp in shock when we finally see the bucket hit rock bottom. Contrast that with the power of incremental progress, the artist who sketches daily, the writer who crafts a single paragraph each morning. These aren't glamorous acts. They won't go viral, but over months and years, they build something no burst of inspiration ever could: mastery. Here's a question to sit with. What tiny habit is quietly shaping your future self? Is it the 5 minutes you spend complaining about traffic, rehearsing resentment until it becomes reflex? Or the 5 minutes you spend jotting down gratitudes, training your mind to spot light in the shadows? The Stoics knew this truth. Character isn't forged in the grand declarations, but in the micro decisions that slip by unnoticed. Every time you choose distraction over depth or patience over pettiness, you're casting a vote for the person you're becoming. So today, pay attention to the seemingly insignificant moments, the pause before you react, the extra minute you linger on a task, the breath you take before speaking. These are the threads weaving the tapestry of your identity, because the strongest lives aren't built in leaps, they're assembled one quiet choice at a time. Forgiveness doesn't always need an audience to be real. In fact, the most powerful kind often happens in silence when you release resentment, not for someone else's benefit, but for your own peace. Epictetus, who knew the sting of injustice firsthand, put it plainly: holding onto anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That's the Stoic insight. Forgiveness isn't about the person who wronged you. It's about reclaiming the space in your mind they've been renting for free. Consider the difference between closure and reconciliation. Closure is an internal shift, a private decision to stop letting someone else's actions dictate your emotional weather. Reconciliation, on the other hand, requires two people to rebuild trust. The Stoics weren't against reconciliation, but they knew it wasn't always possible or even wise. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is forgive silently and move on without demanding an apology that may never come. A woman once shared a story about her estranged father. For years, she'd carried the weight of his absence, the missed birthdays, the unanswered letters. Then one evening, while washing dishes, she realized she wasn't angry anymore. There was no confrontation, no dramatic reunion, just a quiet release, like setting down a suitcase she'd forgotten she was carrying. That's private forgiveness, not a performance of virtue, but an act of self-liberation. Here's a question to sit with: who have you forgiven without telling them? Maybe it's the friend who ghosted you, the co-worker who took credit for your idea, or the stranger whose careless words stuck like a splinter. Stoicism teaches that forgiveness isn't approval, it's refusing to let someone else's choices live rent-free in your head, because resentment doesn't punish the person who hurt you. It only chains you to the past while they move on untouched. So tonight, try this. Light a candle in the dark, literally or metaphorically, and name the resentment you're ready to release. Not because they deserve it, but because you do. That's the unseen work of forgiveness, not a grand gesture, but a quiet revolution in your own heart. And in that silence, you might just find something unexpected: freedom. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." That line isn't about escaping the world, it's about mastering the art of mental solitude, creating space between the chaos outside and the clarity within. Think of your mind like a clear pool of water. Every notification, every demand, every piece of unsolicited opinion is a pebble tossed into that water. At first, the ripples seem harmless, but when the pebbles never stop, the water never settles. That's why Stoic mindfulness isn't just about focus, it's about filtration. It's learning what to let in and what to deflect before it ever reaches your inner stillness. Consider the modern paradox: we have more tools for connection than ever, yet less uninterrupted thought. A study found the average person checks their phone 96 times a day, once every 10 minutes. Each glance fractures attention, each buzz demands a sliver of your mental real estate. Now imagine a digital detox, not as deprivation, but as reclamation. A writer who spent a month offline described it like this: the first week felt like withdrawal. By the third week, I could hear my own thoughts again, ideas I didn't know were buried under the noise. That's Stoic mindfulness in action, recognizing that mental clarity isn't something you find, but something you protect. The Stoics practiced this through deliberate rituals. Seneca would take long walks without companions, not to avoid people, but to converse with himself. Epictetus advised students to pause before reacting to rumors, asking, "Is this within my control? Does it serve my purpose?" These weren't grand gestures, they were daily acts of mental hygiene. Today's equivalent might be turning off notifications during deep work, or designating an hour each evening where screens stay dark. The goal isn't to reject modernity, but to consciously curate its place in your life. So here's a challenge. What mental clutter have you been carrying without realizing it? Maybe it's the news cycle you compulsively refresh, the social comparisons you never chose to make, or the hypothetical arguments you rehearse in the shower. Try this for one day. Observe every input that demands your attention. Then ask, does this nourish my mind or just occupy it? Because guarding your mental clarity isn't selfish. It's the foundation of every intentional decision you'll ever make. The world will always throw pebbles. Your power lies in deciding which ones get to ripple your waters. There's a quiet power in leading when you don't realize you're being watched, when your character isn't a performance but a reflex. Seneca put it bluntly, words teach but actions move. Think of the last time someone's integrity left a mark on you. Chances are it wasn't a speech they gave or a post they shared. It was the way they held the door for a stranger mid-conversation, or how they paused to listen when everyone else was rushing to speak. That's the paradox of unseen influence. The less you announce your values, the louder they resonate. Now contrast that with performative leadership, the kind that thrives on visibility. Picture a manager who preaches work-life balance in team meetings but sends midnight emails with urgent demands. Their words are decorations, their actions are the foundation. Authentic leadership, by contrast, is what happens when the cameras are off. It's the senior developer who stays late to debug a junior's code without mentioning it in the stand-up. It's the CEO who takes the time to learn every intern's name, not for a LinkedIn post, but because dignity doesn't come with a pay grade. Consider a workplace mentor who doesn't formalize their guidance, no scheduled sessions, no checkboxes for leadership development. Instead, they lead by subtle example, how they handle criticism without defensiveness, how they credit others in success and take responsibility in failure. Their influence isn't measured in metrics, but in the quiet way their team starts mirroring those behaviors. No one calls it training, yet everyone grows. That's the Stoic approach to leadership, showing, not telling. So here's a question to sit with. Who sees you when you think no one's looking? Not the polished version you present in meetings, but the unfiltered moments, how you treat the barrister when you're running late, how you react when a project fails and no one's left to blame. Because the legacy you leave won't be the speeches you gave or the titles you held. It'll be the small, unscripted choices that others unconsciously absorb and someday, without realizing why, begin to emulate. Epictetus, the former slave who became one of Stoicism's greatest teachers, had a radical view of duty. If you wish to be good, first believe that you are bad. That jarring statement wasn't about self-loathing, it was about the humility required to serve without expecting applause. Think of a nurse changing bedpans in an empty hospital wing at 3 in the morning, or a neighbor shoveling an elderly couple's driveway before dawn so they never even know who did it. These aren't just acts of kindness, they're silent rebellions against a culture obsessed with personal branding, where every good deed risks becoming content. There's a stark contrast between public charity and secret kindness. One feeds the ego, the viral fundraiser, the check presented with cameras rolling. The other feeds the soul. The Stoics called this kathekon, our duty to contribute without fanfare. When Marcus Aurelius funded scholarships for orphan children, he insisted his name be left off the plaques. Why? Because true service isn't a transaction where you trade generosity for social capital. It's the quiet understanding that helping others is simply what humans owe one another. Consider community volunteering, not the kind you list on a resume, but the unglamorous work no one sees. The Sunday school teacher who spends hours preparing lessons for 5 restless kids. The retired mechanic fixing single moms' cars for free in his garage. These people embody Epictetus' lesson: don't pride yourself on any excellence not your own. Their satisfaction doesn't come from praise, it comes from the private knowledge that they showed up when it counted. Here's the challenge: when did you last help someone without leaving a trace? Maybe it was letting a stranger go ahead of you in line and slipping away before they could thank you. Maybe it was anonymously covering a friend's bill during a rough patch. The Stoics believed these moments were sacred precisely because they're unverified, known only to you and your principles, because the highest form of service isn't measured in likes or recognition. It's measured in the weight of the load you lifted for someone else, and the lightness you felt walking away without waiting for applause. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who saw luxury as chains disguised as comfort, once said, "How can someone accustomed to daily indulgences possibly develop endurance?" That question cuts to the heart of temperance, not as deprivation, but as deliberate resistance to the siren call of now. Think about the last time you stood in a checkout line, phone in hand, thumb hovering over "buy now." That impulse isn't just about the product, it's a test of who governs your mind, the part that craves immediacy or the part that plants stakes for the future. Consider 2 versions of the same person. One wakes up and scrolls through curated highlights of other people's lives while hitting snooze 3 times. The other rises early, ignores the dopamine drip of notifications, and spends 20 minutes moving their body, not for a photo, but for the quiet knowledge that discipline compounds. The difference isn't in their goals, it's in their willingness to trade fleeting pleasure for enduring strength. Stoicism frames this as Incremental self-mastery, not through grand declarations, but through the accumulation of small refusals. Take fitness as a mirror. The athlete who skips dessert every night isn't punishing themselves, they're investing in a version of themselves that doesn't exist yet. Each no to sugar is a yes to stamina, to longevity, to the pride of outlasting instant cravings. Similarly, the Stoics saw money not as currency for consumption, but as a tool for sovereignty. When you resist that flashy purchase, you're not just saving dollars, you're buying freedom from the whims of your own impulsivity. Here's the revealing question: what desire did you recently deny yourself? Maybe it was the extra drink when no one would have judged you for having it, or the luxury item you could technically afford but knew wouldn't enrich your life. These quiet victories matter because they rewire your relationship with desire itself. Every time you pause before indulging, asking, "Is this serving the person I'm becoming?" You strengthen the muscle of intentional living. The modern world thrives on your impatience. One click purchases endless scrolling, fast food, all designed to bypass reflection. But temperance isn't about saying no to enjoyment. It's about saying yes to something deeper. The Stoics knew this: the joy of a clear conscience, the confidence of self-command, the quiet pride of knowing your choices align with your values even when no one's watching. Because the life well lived isn't built on what you grasped for in the moment, it's built on what you had the wisdom to walk away from. Seneca once wrote that admitting a fault is like returning money you've stolen. It doesn't erase the mistake, but it restores your integrity. That's the heart of unseen accountability, the willingness to confront your missteps not because you were caught, but because growth demands honesty with yourself. Think of the last time you failed privately, maybe a project that never saw the light of day, a promise you broke to yourself, or a moment of weakness you rationalized away. The world didn't witness it, but you did, and that's where the real work begins. There's a sharp difference between an excuse and a lesson. An excuse dresses up failure as inevitability. I didn't have enough time, or they didn't give me the resources. A lesson, though, strips away the alibis and asks, what part did I play in this? A tech founder once shared how her first startup collapsed because she avoided tough conversations with her team. Publicly, she blamed market conditions. Privately, she knew the truth. Her fear of conflict had poisoned the culture. That unpublished setback became her crucible. She didn't post about it on LinkedIn or turn it into a TED talk. She carried it silently, letting it reshape how she led her next venture. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Success often teaches us to perform, but failure teaches us to see. When you win, the applause can drown out the cracks in your foundation. But when you stumble alone, no audience, no witnesses, you're forced to confront what really went wrong. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the practice of anticipating challenges, not to fear them, but to strip them of their power to blindside you. It's why Seneca advised keeping a failure journal, not to dwell on regret, but to mine missteps for wisdom. So here's a question to sit with. What's one failure that taught you more than any success? Not the one you've polished into a punchline for networking events, but the one that still makes your chest tighten when you think of it. Maybe it was the job you lost because you cut corners, or the relationship you sabotaged because pride wouldn't let you apologize. The gift of these unseen failures isn't in the stumbling, it's in the humility they leave behind. Because the person who can face their private stumbles without flinching is the one who builds resilience that no public defeat can shake. Epictetus once observed, "No great thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a fig. If you tell me you desire a fig, I answer that there must be time. Let it first blossom, then bear fruit, then ripen." That's the quiet confidence of preparation, the understanding that mastery isn't an event, but a process hidden from view. Think of the musician who spends hours alone with her instrument, repeating scales until her fingers ache. The audience only sees the flawless performance, never the 1,000 imperfect takes that came before. There's a stark difference between the kind of effort that seeks immediate validation and the kind that patiently builds in the shadows. One is a spark, the other is the slow burn that keeps you warm for a lifetime. Consider two students preparing for an exam. One crams the night before, fueled by adrenaline and caffeine, squeezing facts into short-term memory. The other has been reviewing material daily for weeks, not just memorizing but understanding, connecting concepts until they become second nature. The crammer might pass the test, but the second student does something more valuable. They internalize the skill. That's the Stoic approach to preparation. It's not about the applause at the finish line. It's about the silent satisfaction of knowing you've done the work when no one was there to applaud. Take the story of a renowned chef who, even after decades in the spotlight, still arrives at the restaurant hours before opening to sharpen knives, taste stocks, and adjust seasonings. His team doesn't see this ritual. Diners certainly don't, but that unseen diligence is what separates competence from artistry. The Stoics called this ascesis, the disciplined practice that happens far from the spotlight. It's the writer drafting and discarding pages that will never be published, the athlete drilling fundamentals long after the stadium lights dim. So here's a question to sit with. What's your version of those solitary rehearsals? Maybe it's the daily language lesson you take during your lunch break, not for a trip or promotion, but for the joy of stretching your mind. Maybe it's the side project you tinker with after hours, not because it'll go viral, but because it sharpens your creativity. These quiet investments matter because they're not just building skills, they're building trust in yourself. Every hour spent in deliberate practice is a whisper to your future self. when the moment comes, you'll be ready. Because the truest confidence doesn't come from believing you'll rise to the occasion. It comes from knowing you've already done the work long before the occasion arrives. And that's the paradox Epictetus understood. The people who shine brightest in public are often the ones who have grown most comfortable with the dark. Those private hours where excellence is forged, one unseen repetition at a time. Marcus Aurelius scribbled a reminder to himself in his private journal. It's not necessary to report every thought or justify every action. That line captures a radical Stoic idea, the freedom of letting your choices stand on their own. Think about the last time you felt the urge to over-explain. Maybe it was turning down an invitation with a laundry list of reasons, or defending your career path to a relative who'll never understand. Every justification is a tiny surrender, a concession that someone else's approval matters more than your own certainty. There's a quiet power in knowing when to stop talking. Picture two colleagues declining the same unnecessary meeting. One launches into a detailed apology, family obligations, overlapping deadlines, promises to review the notes. The other simply says, "I won't be able to join, but I appreciate the invite." Both get the same result, fewer calendar conflicts. Only one walks away with their time and dignity intact. Stoicism teaches that explanations are like reins. The more you hand them to others, the more they can steer you. Modern life rewards oversharing. Social media trains us to package every decision as a story, to seek validation for choices that should need no audience. But the Stoics practiced something subtler, the art of the unadorned no. When Epictetus taught his students to set boundaries, he didn't coach them on crafting the perfect excuse. He said, if you want to improve, be content to appear clueless or foolish. In other words, let them misunderstand you. Your peace is worth more than their comprehension. Here's a revealing exercise. Recall a recent choice you instinctively over-explained: the vegan meal you justified at a barbecue, the early exit from a party, the book you hid on the plane. Now imagine doing it differently, not with defiance but with the quiet assurance of someone who's decided their reasons are enough, even unspoken. That's the heart of Stoic self-possession, not the absence of doubt, but the refusal to let doubt dictate your words. So today, try this. Let one decision stand without commentary, not as an act of rudeness, but as an experiment in trust. Trust that your judgment doesn't require a jury. Because the less you explain, the more you embody Seneca's observation. The wise man carries his possessions within him. No justification needed. Envy is one of the few emotions that burns twice: first in the heart of the one who feels it, then in the relationships it corrodes. But Seneca, ever the alchemist of human emotion, offered a radical alternative. Don't envy the person who has more, admire the one who needs less. That distinction changes everything. Stoicism doesn't ask you to eliminate comparison, it teaches you to weaponize it. When you see someone thriving, the question isn't, why not me? But, what can this reveal about what I value? Take two co-workers up for the same promotion. One fixates on the unfairness, tallying every perceived advantage the other had. The other studies their colleagues' habits, how they prepare for meetings, handle setbacks, communicate under pressure. The first person sees a rival, the second sees a mirror reflecting their own untapped potential. That's the Stoic pivot, transforming envy from a poison to a compass. History's most enduring figures mastered this mental shift. Michelangelo didn't resent the sculptors who came before him. He absorbed their techniques until his hands could outdream theirs. The philosopher Zeno, founder of Stoicism, turned his envy of Socrates into a lifelong pursuit of wisdom after a shipwreck left him stranded in Athens with nothing but a borrowed book. What if your jealousy isn't a sign of pettiness? but a coded message about what you're capable of desiring deeply enough to work for. Here's the litmus test. When you scroll through social media and feel that familiar pang, does it send you spiraling or strategizing? The Stoics practiced mindful attention to their emotional triggers. Next time envy flares, pause, ask, is this person's success threatening me or teaching me? The answer separates resentment from fuel, so consider this: whose achievements stir something in you, not because they have what you want, but because they embody who you could become. Maybe it's the friend who built a business from scratch, not for the luxury cars, but for the freedom to create. Maybe it's the artist who produces relentlessly, indifferent to algorithms. Their victories aren't your failures, they're proof that what you admire exists in the world, and by extension within your reach. The ancient Greeks had two words for envy: phthonос, the destructive kind that wishes others to lose, and zelos, the emulative kind that ignites our own striving. Stoicism invites us to cultivate the second, because the person who can look at another's light without feeling diminished has discovered a secret. Comparison doesn't have to be theft. It can be the kindling for your own fire. There's a particular kind of strength in leaving your anger unanswered, not because you lack the words, but because you've mastered the art of choosing them. Epictetus, who knew the sting of injustice better than most, offered a simple rule for heated moments. If someone speaks harshly to you, let your first response be silence. That silence isn't weakness or suppression. It's the space between provocation and reaction where Stoic restraint lives. Think of it like holding a burning coal. The longer you clutch it, the deeper it sears. The person who throws it back immediately gets burned just as badly, but the one who sets it down, they walk away unharmed. Consider the modern battleground of online arguments. You're scrolling, you see a comment that twists your gut, your fingers hover over the keyboard. This is the moment of truth. The Stoics would ask, what do you gain by engaging? Not in the abstract, but concretely. Does your reply change minds or just feed the algorithm's appetite for conflict? There's a difference between suppressing anger and mindfully pausing to ask whether expressing it serves any purpose beyond momentary relief. The former bottles emotion, the latter transforms it into intentional action or inaction. A journalist once shared how she'd spent years crafting razor-sharp rebuttals to critics online. One day, after firing off a particularly vicious tweet, she noticed something unsettling. Her heart was still racing an hour later. The critic had likely moved on, but she was left jittery, distracted, her morning ruined. That's the hidden cost of unrestrained reactions. They don't punish the other person. They colonize your peace. The Stoic alternative: write the scathing reply in a note, sleep on it, and delete it at dawn. The clarity you gain is worth more than the fleeting satisfaction of a last word. So here's a challenge. When did you last swallow a sharp reply? Not because you were intimidated, but because you recognized that some battles are won by refusing to fight them. Maybe it was the snide remark at dinner that you let dissolve into silence, or the email that deserved a fiery response but got measured professionalism instead. These are the invisible victories, the ones no one applauds, but which fortify your character far more than any public confrontation. Because restraint isn't about denying your feelings, it's about honoring them enough not to waste them on unworthy targets. The next time anger flares, try this. Picture your words as stones. Throwing them might feel powerful in the moment, but real strength lies in knowing which walls are worth breaking, and which aren't walls at all, just mirrors reflecting back the energy you choose to invest. What if your character wasn't just who you are, but what you own, not in possessions, but in unseen wealth? The Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus put it plainly: wealth is not in gold or land, but in the soul. That's the radical idea of character as capital, the understanding that the most valuable investments aren't visible on balance sheets, but in the quiet accumulation of integrity, resilience, and wisdom. Think of it like this: while the world obsesses over followers and net worth, the Stoics were tracking a different metric: the compound interest of consistent self-mastery. Consider two people starting with equal opportunities. One chases external validation, promotions for the title, friendships for the social capital, hobbies for the Instagram aesthetic. The other invests inwardly, reading not to post highlights but to reshape their thinking, exercising not for a summer body but for lifelong vitality, practicing honesty even when lying would save face. Over time, the gap between them widens. The first might climb the ladder faster, but the second builds something far more valuable: an identity that doesn't fluctuate with market trends or popularity polls. Take lifelong learning as the ultimate invisible asset. A lawyer who studies philosophy not for credentials but to sharpen her reasoning isn't just acquiring knowledge, she's compounding intellectual endurance. A mechanic who spends evenings tinkering with antique engines isn't just fixing machines, he's cultivating patience and curiosity that spill into every area of his life. These aren't resume lines or conversation starters. They're the slow, steady work of building mental and moral infrastructure, the kind that holds firm when external rewards fade. Now ask yourself, what intangible quality are you quietly cultivating? Maybe it's the ability to listen without formulating your next argument, or the discipline to sit with discomfort instead of numbing it. These aren't glamorous skills, no one awards trophies for them, but they're the real currency of a meaningful life, the kind of wealth that can't be stolen, devalued, or outgrown. Because while the world measures followers and fortunes, the Stoics measured something far more enduring: the depth of your character, the clarity of your purpose, and the quiet confidence of knowing you've invested in what truly appreciates yourself. Seneca wrote a letter to his friend Lucilius that cut straight to the heart of modern loneliness. No one is happy if they depend on someone else for their joy. That line isn't about rejecting connection, it's about reclaiming the ability to be whole even when connections fade. Think about the last time you sat alone in a quiet room. No phone, no distractions, just you and your thoughts. For most of us, that space feels uncomfortable at first, like an itch we're desperate to scratch with notifications or background noise. But the Stoics saw something different in solitude. Not emptiness, but a training ground for self-sufficiency. There's a crucial distinction between loneliness and chosen solitude. Loneliness aches with absence, it's the feeling that something's missing. Solitude, though, that's presence, the deliberate act of turning inward to discover what's already there. Picture an artist in her studio at dawn, the world still asleep, her focus unbroken by demands or small talk. That's not isolation, it's immersion. The Stoics practiced this daily through melite, the discipline of self-reflection. Marcus Aurelius would retreat to his chambers not to escape his duties, but to fortify his mind for them. Consider the creative breakthroughs that happen in these unobserved hours. The writer who solves a plot problem during a long walk, the programmer who cracks a coding challenge in the shower, the musician who finds a melody while washing dishes. These aren't accidents, they're the fruits of solitude, the mind working freely without an audience. Seneca called this sessesis, the art of withdrawing not from life, but from life's distractions to return sharper. Now reflect, when did you last enjoy your own company without distraction? Not just tolerating being alone, but actively savoring it, whether through journaling, tinkering with a hobby, or simply sitting with your thoughts like an old friend. Because here's the paradox Stoicism reveals: the more comfortable you become in solitude, the richer your connections with others grow. You stop using people as mirrors to reflect your worth back at you, and start seeing them as fellow travelers, not to complete you, but to accompany you. The next time you feel that twinge of discomfort when the room goes quiet, try this. Don't reach for the phone. Don't fill the silence. Just listen to your breath, to the hum of your own mind. That's where Seneca's joy lies, not in dependence on externals, but in the quiet certainty that you are enough, even when no one's there to affirm it. Your identity isn't carved in the moments the world applauds. It's assembled in the quiet, uncelebrated choices you make when the curtains are closed. Every time you choose discipline over convenience, integrity over approval, or intentionality over impulse, you're placing another tile in the mosaic of who you are. The Stoics understood this better than anyone. Strength isn't something you summon in crisis. It's something you cultivate in obscurity, like a tree growing roots deep underground long before it ever bears fruit. Think back to the themes we've explored: the discipline of morning rituals no one witnesses, the integrity of doing what's right when no one's keeping score, the intentionality of guarding your attention like a sacred space. These aren't just habits, they're the invisible architecture of character. Marcus Aurelius called it the inner citadel, the private fortress of principles that remains unshaken even when external rewards crumble. Epictetus, the philosopher who turned adversity into wisdom, left us a lesser-known gem. No man is free who is not master of himself. That mastery isn't about controlling every circumstance, it's about owning your reactions to them. It's the difference between being dragged by your impulses and steering with your values, even when the path is steep and the audience is absent. So here's your challenge tonight: audit your unseen decisions. Not the ones you post about, but the ones that happen in the margins: how you spend the first quiet minute of your day, how you speak to yourself after a mistake, what you do when the spotlight's glare fades. Those are the moments that matter most. They're the raw materials of your identity, waiting to be shaped by your hands alone. And when you notice yourself choosing courage in the shadows, or holding fast to your principles when no one's there to see it, that's what I'd love to hear in the comments. Share one invisible victory from your life, not the triumph the world celebrated, but the quiet win only you truly understood. Because those are the stories that remind us all, the strongest parts of ourselves are often the ones no one else can